Wait. Stop scrolling for 1 minute. Yeah, you. If you skip this, you might keep repeating the same mistake without even realizing it. Have you ever heard something that sounded right, but felt wrong deep inside? That feeling you ignore, that's the signal. And today, I'm about to reveal 5 phrases that if a woman says to you, the problem isn't you, it's that you stayed. There comes a moment, quiet, almost invisible, when something inside you starts to feel off, even if everything on the surface looks fine. You can't always explain it. It's not loud, not dramatic. It's subtle. A sentence, a tone, a pattern. And yet, your mind keeps returning to it, like a whisper you weren't meant to ignore. Most people don't walk away when they should. Not because they're weak, but because they've been conditioned to doubt their own perception. Attraction, after all, is not just about chemistry, it's about interpretation. When a woman tells you, "You're too good for me," it sounds like admiration. But listen more carefully. This is not always a compliment, it's often a quiet withdrawal. Psychologically, it's a way of creating distance without confrontation. Instead of saying, "I don't feel strongly enough," the mind chooses a softer exit, one that places you on a pedestal while stepping away from it. The danger is not in her words, it's in how you interpret them. You might hear value, but what's really being expressed is disconnection. And when someone emotionally steps back while verbally lifting you up, the contradiction is not confusion, it's clarity in disguise. Then comes the uncertainty. "I don't know what I want right now." This phrase keeps people trapped longer than rejection ever could. Because rejection is clean, it closes a door. But ambiguity keeps the door slightly open, just enough for hope to survive. And hope, when unsupported by action, becomes a psychological trap. It places you in a position where you keep investing, waiting for clarity that never comes. But here's the deeper truth. When someone is genuinely drawn to you, confusion doesn't dominate their behavior. Movement does. Indecision in this context is often a quiet form of disinterest wrapped in emotional complexity. And when you begin to feel the imbalance, when something inside you reacts, you might hear, "Why are you so sensitive?" This is where the dynamic shifts. Your reaction is no longer about what happened. It becomes about who you are. This is not communication, it's redirection. Instead of addressing the issue, the focus is placed on your response, subtly training you to question your own feelings. Over time, this erodes something essential, your trust in your own perception. You begin to filter your emotions, minimize your concerns, and silence your instincts. But sensitivity is not weakness, it's awareness. And when awareness is dismissed, it's not because it's invalid, it's because it's inconvenient. Sometimes the past is introduced in a way that feels revealing. "All my exes were toxic." It sounds like honesty, maybe even vulnerability. But patterns don't lie, they repeat. When every story ends with someone else being the problem, there's a deeper layer that remains unexplored. Accountability is the foundation of emotional growth, and without it, history doesn't stay in the past. It recreates itself in the present. What you're hearing is not just information about her past, it's insight into her self-perception. And if there's no reflection there, you're not entering a new story. You're stepping into an ongoing cycle. Then comes one of the most confusing emotional contradictions. "I need space, but I still want you in my life." This is where attachment becomes complicated. Space, in a healthy context, creates clarity. But here it creates imbalance. You're being asked to stay connected without receiving the structure of a relationship. Emotionally available but not fully included. This dynamic keeps you in a state of waiting, present but uncertain. And the mind, naturally, tries to resolve uncertainty by giving more patience, more understanding, more effort. But the truth is, connection without direction is not depth, it's delay. And then there's the statement that feels the most flattering: "You're different from other guys." It sounds like recognition, like you've been seen in a way others haven't. But sometimes this isn't about you, it's about projection. You're being placed into a role, an idea, an expectation. And as long as you fit that image, everything feels aligned. But the moment reality introduces complexity, your flaws, your boundaries, your individuality, the illusion begins to crack. And when attraction is built on projection rather than understanding, it doesn't fade slowly, it shifts suddenly, leaving you questioning what changed, when in reality, nothing did except perception. All of these moments have one thing in common. They test your ability to trust what you feel, not just what you hear. Because human behavior is layered. Words exist on the surface, but meaning lives underneath. And the more you ignore that deeper layer, the more disconnected you become from your own clarity. Attraction is not just about being chosen, it's about recognizing when something is misaligned, even if it's subtle. The real shift happens when you stop trying to decode mixed signals and start respecting consistent patterns. When you realize that confusion is not something to solve, it's something to observe. And most importantly, when you understand that walking away is not a loss of opportunity, it's the preservation of self-respect. Know when silence is your answer. There's a quiet kind of tension that builds in certain connections, a feeling you can't quite name, but you carry it with you long after the conversation ends. It doesn't come from what's obvious. It comes from what's implied, what's left unsaid, what doesn't align. And the truth is, most people don't recognize these moments for what they are. They explain them away, soften them, reinterpret them into something more comfortable. But attraction isn't just about what pulls you in, it's about what slowly pushes you away while pretending it isn't. When she looks at you and says, "You're too good for me," it feels like admiration. Almost like you've been placed on a pedestal. But real connection doesn't create distance, it closes it. This phrase often carries a hidden contradiction. It elevates you while simultaneously removing you from reach. Psychologically, it's a form of gentle detachment, a way to exit without appearing harsh. And what makes it dangerous is how easily it can be misunderstood. You might try to prove her wrong, to show her you're not too good. But in doing so, you begin lowering yourself to maintain something she's already stepping away from. It's not a compliment, it's a quiet conclusion. Then there's the uncertainty that sounds honest. I don't know what I want right now. On the surface, it feels real, even vulnerable. But look deeper. Clarity doesn't come from words, it comes from behavior. When someone is truly drawn to you, their actions move toward you, not away from definition. Indecision becomes a space where emotional responsibility is avoided. It allows her to keep the connection without committing to it, to receive without clearly giving. And you, in that space, begin to wait. You analyze, you hope, you stay available. But waiting for clarity from someone who benefits from your confusion only delays your own. At some point, you begin to feel it, the imbalance, the inconsistency. And when you express it, you might hear, "Why are you so sensitive?" This is where something deeper begins to shift. Your reaction is no longer treated as a response to something real. It's reframed as a flaw within you. It's subtle, but powerful. Because the moment you start questioning your own emotional reactions, you disconnect from your internal compass. You begin to second guess what you feel, minimize what bothers you, and adjust yourself to avoid being labeled. But awareness is not weakness. Discomfort is not irrational. And when your feelings are consistently redirected instead of understood, it's not communication, it's deflection. Then comes the past, introduced in a way that seems transparent. All my exes were toxic. It sounds like she's opening up, giving you context. But patterns reveal more than stories. When every previous connection ends with blame placed entirely on others, it suggests something unresolved. Because growth requires reflection, and reflection requires accountability. Without it, the same dynamics repeat, just with different faces. And if you ignore that pattern, you don't become the exception, you become the continuation. The past doesn't stay behind when it hasn't been understood. It follows quietly into the present, and then you hear something that creates even more confusion. I need space, but I still want you in my life. It sounds balanced, almost fair, but listen carefully. Space, in a healthy dynamic, creates room for clarity and return. Here, it creates distance without direction. You're being asked to stay emotionally connected while stepping back from your own needs. Available but undefined, present but not prioritized. And the human mind doesn't handle that well. It tries to resolve uncertainty by giving more patience, more understanding, more effort. But effort without reciprocity doesn't deepen connection. It drains it. Because what you're really being asked to do is stay without stability. Then comes the line that feels like validation. You're different from other guys. It lands softly, almost like recognition. But sometimes it's not recognition, it's projection. You're being seen not for who you fully are, but for what you represent in that moment. An idea, a contrast, a temporary escape from past experiences. And as long as you fit that image, everything feels aligned. But the moment you show complexity, your boundaries, your flaws, your individuality, the illusion begins to shift. Because the connection wasn't built on full understanding, it was built on selective perception. And when perception changes, so does the feeling, often without explanation. All of this creates a pattern that's easy to miss if you're only listening to words. But behavior, consistency, and emotional alignment tell a different story. The deeper psychology here isn't about her, it's about how you respond. Because every one of these moments presents a choice. to question yourself or to trust what you're sensing, to stay in confusion or to step into clarity, to hold on to potential or to recognize reality. The hardest part is that none of these signals are loud. They don't demand immediate action. They linger. They blur. They leave room for interpretation. And that's exactly why they're often ignored. But the more you ignore them, the more you disconnect from something essential, your ability to see things as they are, not as you hope them to be. Attraction becomes dangerous when it overrides awareness. When you start valuing the connection more than your clarity, when you tolerate what confuses you instead of questioning it, because in the end, it's not about understanding her perfectly, it's about not losing yourself in the process of trying. And the moment you start choosing clarity over comfort, everything changes. Walk away before you have to. There's a subtle shift that happens in certain connections, a moment where something stops feeling natural, but nothing is clearly wrong. No arguments, no dramatic endings, just a quiet sense that you're adjusting more than you should. Most people ignore that feeling. They override it with logic, with patience, with hope. But attraction isn't just about how strongly you feel drawn to someone, it's about how much of yourself you have to silence to stay. When she says, "You're too good for me," it lands like admiration, but it carries distance within it. Real admiration brings people closer. It doesn't create space. This phrase often reflects an internal decision that hasn't been fully spoken. Instead of expressing disinterest directly, the mind chooses a softer exit, one that sounds like praise but functions as separation. And the trap here is subtle. You might try to meet her where she is, to prove that you're not too good, slowly lowering your standards just to keep the connection alive. But the truth is, when someone positions you above them, they're not inviting you closer, they're stepping back. Then comes the uncertainty that feels almost honest. I don't know what I want right now. It sounds like confusion, maybe even emotional depth. But confusion in attraction rarely behaves passively. It shows itself through inconsistency. This phrase creates a psychological gray zone where nothing is defined, yet everything is still active. You stay engaged, hoping clarity will come, believing that patience will be rewarded. But the deeper pattern is this. When someone benefits from your presence without committing to your value, indecision becomes a comfortable place to stay. And the longer you remain there, the more you adapt to a dynamic where you give certainty while receiving none. At some point, your instincts respond. You notice the imbalance, the emotional distance, the lack of reciprocity, and when you express it, you might hear, "Why are you so sensitive?" This is where your perception is quietly challenged. The focus shifts from what you're experiencing to how you're reacting. It's not about the situation anymore, it becomes about you. And over time, this reframing does something deeper than just dismiss your concern, it conditions you to distrust your own feelings. You start questioning whether you're overreacting, whether your standards are too high, whether your expectations are unreasonable. But awareness is not overreaction, it's recognition. And when recognition is constantly minimized, it's not because it's wrong, it's because it's inconvenient to address. Then the past enters the conversation. All my exes were toxic. It sounds like openness, like she's giving you insight into what she's been through, but patterns speak louder than stories. When every previous relationship is framed through blame directed outward, something is missing: reflection. Because growth requires the ability to look inward, to recognize one's own role in repeated outcomes. Without that, the past doesn't transform, it repeats. And when you step into that pattern, you're not starting fresh. You're continuing something unresolved. The roles may change, but the dynamics stay the same. And then comes the emotional contradiction that keeps people stuck. I need space, but I still want you in my life. It sounds balanced, almost reasonable. But listen closely. It creates a dynamic where you're expected to stay connected without receiving clarity. You're present, but not prioritized. Available, but not fully included. And the human mind struggles with this kind of ambiguity. It tries to resolve it by giving more understanding, more patience, more effort. But the more you give in an undefined space, the more you lose structure within yourself. Because connection without direction doesn't build intimacy, it prolongs uncertainty. Then there's the statement that feels like validation. You're different from other guys. It touches something deeper. It makes you feel seen. But sometimes what feels like recognition is actually projection. You're not being understood fully. You're being placed into a role that contrasts her past experiences. And as long as you fit that image, everything flows. But the moment you show your full self, your boundaries, your individuality, your imperfections, the dynamic begins to shift. Because the connection wasn't built on who you truly are, it was built on who you appeared to be in that moment. And when perception changes, so does attraction, often without warning. All of these moments carry a common thread. They challenge your ability to trust your own perception, because none of them are loud enough to demand immediate action. They're subtle, layered, easy to reinterpret, and that's why they're often overlooked. You tell yourself to be patient, to be understanding, to give it time, but time doesn't clarify what behavior already reveals. It only deepens your attachment to something that lacks direction. The real shift happens when you stop trying to make sense of mixed signals and start recognizing consistent patterns. When you understand that confusion is not something you need to fix, it's something you need to observe. And most importantly, when you realize that your role is not to decode someone else's intentions at the cost of your own clarity. Because in the end, attraction should not feel like something you have to analyze to understand. It should feel aligned, steady, real. And the moment it starts requiring you to question yourself more than you trust yourself, that's not depth. That's disconnection. Choose clarity before attachment chooses for you. There's a point in certain connections where you begin to feel like you're slowly disappearing, not all at once, not dramatically, but in small, almost unnoticeable ways. You speak a little less freely, you question your reactions a little more, you tolerate things you once wouldn't have. And the strange part is, nothing explicitly told you to change. It just happened. This is how subtle psychological dynamics work. They don't force you, they reshape you quietly until one day you realize you've been adjusting to something that never truly aligned with you. It often begins with something that sounds like admiration. You're too good for me. At first, it feels like you're being valued, even respected. But if you listen beyond the words, there's distance hidden inside them. Genuine admiration pulls people closer. It doesn't create emotional separation. This phrase is often a way of stepping back without confrontation, of softening an exit before it fully happens. And what makes it powerful is how it invites you to respond. You might try to reassure her, to prove that you're not too good, slowly lowering your own position just to maintain the connection. But the deeper reality is this. When someone defines you as out of reach, they've already decided not to meet you where you stand. Then comes the uncertainty that keeps you emotionally engaged. I don't know what I want right now. It feels honest, maybe even vulnerable. But this kind of ambiguity has a psychological effect. It keeps you in motion without direction. You continue investing, thinking clarity will come with time, believing your consistency might resolve her confusion. But attraction doesn't work that way. When someone truly wants you, their actions move toward you with intention. Indecision in this context is not a phase, it's a position. And the longer you stay in that undefined space, the more you normalize a dynamic where your certainty is met with hesitation. Eventually, something inside you reacts. You begin to notice the imbalance, the inconsistency, the subtle emotional distance. And when you express it, the response shifts the focus. Why are you so sensitive? This is where your internal compass is quietly challenged. Instead of addressing what you feel, the attention turns to how you feel it. It reframes your awareness as a flaw, your reaction as an overextension. And over time, this does something deeper than dismiss a single concern. It conditions you to question your own perception. You start filtering your emotions, holding back your thoughts, trying to appear less affected. But awareness is not weakness, it's clarity. And when clarity is consistently redirected, it's not because it's wrong, it's because it disrupts a narrative that benefits from your silence. Then the past enters the conversation, often presented as transparency. All my exes were toxic. It sounds like openness, like she